Is there a close connection between food supply and political control?
Yeah, I think there absolutely is a close connection between the food supply and political control.
Bueno amigos, hoy tenemos la presencia de los amigos de Rock Egg Nationalist. Estamos hablando de una figura muy influyente, sobre todo en Estados Unidos, en el ámbito de la salud y de todo el tema fitness. Es conocido por su enfoque en el consumo de comida cruda básicamente y sobre todo la recomendación de comer huevos y esta retórica también importante nacionalista, ¿no? De tratar de alcanzar pues la resiliencia, la más importante. En realidad la persona con la que vamos a hablar es Charles Cornish Dale, no es muy amigo de salir en las cámaras. Él es un académico inglés con un doctorado en historia religiosa y ha ganado notoriedad pues últimamente a través de su blog y publicaciones en redes sociales. Ahí promueve, repito, esta idea del Rock Egg Nationalist, que básicamente es algo así como el nacionalismo del huevo crudo, ¿no? Y básicamente pues nos habla de cómo podemos tener allí una forma de combatir lo que él llama el globalismo de soja y todo el tema de la feminización de los cuerpos masculinos. Es una entrevista extraordinaria, ¿no? Estamos hablando de un movimiento que lidera ahí mucho tiempo ya, una comunidad muy importante que sostiene pues que el consumo de alimentos densos en nutrientes como los huevos crudos es esencial para mantener la salud y la masculinidad. Y por supuesto rechaza la influencia de la industria militar alimentaria, esta que es realmente muy moderna y que nos tiene en jaque, ¿no? También que nos muestra pues o nos entrega estas dietas basadas en productos procesados. Cornishdale argumenta que una dieta basada en alimentos naturales y no procesados pues puede realmente ayudar a resistir lo que él percibe como un intento de los globalistas de debilitar y controlar a la población. Además pues de su enfoque en esta dieta y en la salud, este hombre pues ha expresado opiniones realmente importantes, como la teoría del gran reemplazo. Allí sugiere pues que las élites occidentales están intentando reemplazar deliberadamente a las poblaciones blancas con inmigrantes. Aunque de eso no hablamos, creo que de lo que hablamos pues se entienden muchas cosas, ¿no? Es importante, repito, que vean esta entrevista porque van a entender muchas cosas sobre el control de los alimentos políticamente hablando, ¿no? Y de cómo están intentando los globalistas debilitar a las poblaciones para hacerlas menos resistentes. Así que empezamos.
Is there a close connection between food supply and political control?
Yeah, I think there absolutely is a close connection between the food supply and political control. And in fact, that's actually the central theme of my last book, The Eggs Benedict Option, which I wrote in 2022 about the movement towards a global plant-based diet. So you probably hear a lot about plant-based diets, about veganism and vegetarianism, and how we have to move away from consumption of animal products, from meat and dairy, towards plant-based diets in order to save the planet, firstly, because carbon emissions from traditional agriculture are too high. And also in order to feed a global population of 10 billion. And that's the estimate for the global population in 2050, in just a couple of decades. So you hear a lot of talk about, plant-based diets are the future, animal-based diets are the past. And really what I try to get at in the book, The Eggs Benedict Option, is how the move towards a global plant-based diet would be one in which the power of corporations over the food supplies is increased exponentially. So one of the main sort of stories of food, of our diets in the 20th century, has been the growth of corporate power over the food supply. And that it's seen people move away over the last 100 years, move away from the kind of foods that they were eating, that our ancestors ate for, since time immemorial, locally produced whole foods, to a diet of industrially produced processed foods, in a food supply that is more and more controlled by corporations. And a plant-based future would basically be a future in which corporations have total control over the food supply, because, in order to produce enough crops, in order to produce enough grains and enough legumes like soy, etc., to feed the world a plant-based diet, you would have to use new genetically modified varieties of soy and corn and wheat, and they would all be owned by corporations with patents. So, I mean, there's definitely a very, very sort of obvious relationship between food and social control, but it goes back much further than that. So in the Eggs Benedict option, then I start the book actually with a discussion of Plato's Republic. And there's a so this is like a classic text in the history of philosophy and the history of political philosophy, written, 2,300 years ago in ancient Greece by the philosopher Plato. And he talks about, or he has one of the characters, his version of Socrates, his mentor in the Republic. He actually talks about how you could control a society by altering the food supply, by altering what people eat. And he basically makes the argument that actually, if you wanted to have a society of willing slaves, of people who just do exactly as they're told and don't create any trouble, then you would feed them a vegetarian diet. And this is 2,300 years ago that we're, one of the first social planners, Plato, first political philosophers, is saying this. And this idea that you can manipulate societies by manipulating what they eat, their access to different kinds of foods, is an ancient one. But it's also an idea that we see actualized in events like, for example, the agricultural revolution. And so that's the discovery, or when farming became widespread, basically in the Near East, about 10 to 12,000 years ago. You had a total change in the way of life of ordinary people, from hunter-gatherers to farmers. And the evidence suggests more and more that actually people were forced to undergo the transition from hunter-gatherer to fixed field farming. So there's a very, very intimate connection, I think, between political power and the food supply. We forget it. So we're accustomed to think about, for instance, the relationship between political power and control of energy. We all know that political power is greased by oil, fossil fuels. But actually people forget that we all need to eat. We all need to eat, and it's a political question. Who controls the food supply? Who decides what we eat? And so that's actually really at the heart of my work, and it's been at the heart of my most recent work, including this book, The Eggs Benedict option, is getting to the heart of this relationship and showing how actually, this idea that we should all eat plant-based diets is a totally political idea, and it needs to be resisted politically as well. So that's basically the second half of the book is a detailed program where I lay out, this is how we could resist this movement to get us to give up the foods that actually are essential for our well-being and health. So, we need to eat animal products to be healthy human beings. That's just a given as far as I'm concerned.
In your book, you mentioned that the food blockade is a deliberate strategy of the globalists to weaken the population. You mentioned that some experts, such as Matthew S. Liao, are promoting the bioengineering to make people smaller and less able to consume meat. How do you come to this conclusion, and what implication does this have for humanity?
Yeah, that's a crazy one. So this chap, Matthew S. Liao, is a bioethicist. I think he's at Princeton. He's been at various other places as well, or he was at Princeton, actually. I think he's in New York now. But he writes extensively about basically genetically engineering people in order to save the planet from climate change. So he's come up with this idea, for instance, that you could genetically engineer people to be smaller, so that you would actually you physically reduce people's stature, and that means that they consume less carbon per person. And he's talked about things like, making people basically allergic to meat so that they just can't eat it. So it's not a question of whether or not you want to eat meat. It's a question of whether or not you actually even physically can. And there are natural, you can get meat allergies from tick bites. So if you're bitten by a Lone Star tick, which is a particular type of tick that you find in certain regions in America, you can actually develop a meat allergy that prevents you from eating meat. And S. Matthew Liao had this idea, oh, well, why don't, if we want to stop people from eating meat because of climate change, well, let's genetically engineer them so that actually they have this allergy. So, I mean, it sounds like it's crazy. I mean, it really does sound like it's crazy. And you think, oh, well, this guy's just, this guy's just a bit of a nut. And, but the thing is that actually you have these huge organizations, big organizations, the World Economic Forum, all sorts of NGOs talking about these kinds of things, presenting these kinds of things as solutions. I mean, S. Matthew Liao is associated with the World Economic Forum. He's spoken for them, at various different events, including at Davos, I think. I mean, there's absolutely no doubt in my mind that globalist institutions, corporations, non-governmental organizations, governments as well, want people to give up meat, and they are prepared to consider quite radical solutions. So, they talk about bioengineering, biohacking, that kind of thing, whatever they call it. But they also talk about things like carbon taxes, meat rationing. They'll talk about things like, they'll talk about inflation as well. They'll talk about leveraging inflation, for example, to stop people from eating meat. And that's something that I talk about in the book as well. So they have they're really buying into this idea that there needs to be a global agricultural transformation that will change the way that food is produced, change the way that people eat, and it will be part of a broader social and economic transformation that will save the planet from climate change and make the planet a more equitable, fair place as well. And this is often referred to as the Great Reset, and that's what people, that's a term that a lot of people know. And it's not a conspiracy theory. You can read the policy papers, you can read the publications. These people are talking about it all the time. Heads of corporations, philanthropists, members of government, people at the UN, etc. I mean, I think it's very clearly
Yeah,
an agenda.
actually, my next question was about that. It was in your
Sure.
opinion, in your opinion, what are the real intentions behind the food policies promoted by the World Economic Forum and the UN, and how these policies relate to the concept of the Great Reset? But because we understand that the Great Reset plan for agriculture will further consolidate this corporate control, eliminating
Yes.
any residual freedom for small producers, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So yeah, I mean I think that fundamentally it is about corporate control of every aspect of the economy and more or less every aspect of life as well. I mean, and in that regard, then I actually, in the book, The Eggs Benedict Option, I compare the Great Reset to the agricultural revolution that took place 10 to 12,000 years ago in the Near East. I say, look, in many respects, the agricultural revolution, the transition to agriculture, was the first Great Reset because it was a total transformation of society off the back of a transformation of the mode of producing food. So you go from simple hunter-gatherer societies to complex urban societies that are supported by large numbers of agricultural workers who basically are basically slaves, more or less. And then you have an elite on top who extract a tax surplus from the agricultural producers in the form of grain and get to live, they live a life of plenty, and everybody else is just eating grains and they're unhealthy and they have low life expectancy, etc. And there are definite parallels, I think, between that transformation that made people much less free and the transformation that's envisaged today, because people fundamentally are going to be totally alienated from not only from the production of food, so there won't, as you say, there won't be any small producers. It's just going to be corporate mega producers using genetically modified crops and high technology, lab grown meat, plant-based meat, all of these so-called alternative proteins that we hear about, insects, insect farms, all that kind of stuff. People will be totally alienated from the production and control of the kind of foods that they eat. And that is part and parcel of a broader sort of deprivation of freedom, if you will. We're all going to become less free, not only in terms of what we choose to eat, but also in terms of how we live our lives. Our lives are going to be highly regulated because of climate change, because of carbon emissions, and all that kind of stuff. We're going to be limited in the ways that we can travel, in the ways that we can, the kind of things that the way that we can heat our homes, the kind of things that we can buy, the kind of places we can go, and the things that we can do, etc. So it's important, I think, to see this revolution in food as part of a broader social revolution that actually is going to make us all much less free.
I'm going to leave you guys the Substack and the Twitter links of our guest. Also, his last book link. Please go there; it's really worth it, and I mean that. So please go. It's going to be on the description and also on the comments. You know that your book mentions that the industrialization of food production had led to a decline in public health since 1930s. What specific steps should governments take to reserve this trend and ensure healthy food for the citizens?
Well, I mean, one of the central points that I make in the book is that we need a political movement that will guarantee our access to what I call nutrient-dense animal foods. So when I talk about the decline in health in the 20th century as a result of the consolidation of the food supply in the hands of corporations, corporate producers, I draw on a book called Nutrition and Physical Degeneration that was written by a dentist called Weston A. Price. It's an incredible book. I think it's possibly the greatest book on nutrition ever written, actually. And what Weston Price did basically was he was a dentist in the US in Cleveland, and he noticed this was sort of the early 20th century through to the 1930s, and he noticed that more and more of his clients, especially children, were becoming more and more unwell. They would develop. So he was a dentist, so he was looking primarily at their faces and their jaws and teeth, and he noticed significant basically degeneration of the physical structure of the face. Cavities, malformed dental arches, so that's the top of the mouth, narrow cheeks and nasal passages. People's faces were literally sort of collapsing. He could see it happening, and he theorized that it was something to do with diet, that it was to do with the fact that people's diets were changing. And so what he did was he went around the world and he wanted to compare what was happening in the US, in industrial nations, with the diet, where we're changing to industrially produced foodstuffs, to canned goods, refined flours and grains, and things like that. He wanted to compare the health of people eating diets like that with the health of traditional societies, tribal groups, small-scale societies who were eating the kind of foods that they had always eaten, their ancestral diets. And so he went around the world, North America, Africa, Asia, Europe as well, the Pacific, and he found traditional groups who were eating their traditional diets, and they were in fantastic health. And he documented their health, and he documented what they ate. And he came to the conclusion, basically, that in order to have proper physical health and proper physical development, you need to eat nutrient-dense animal foods. That was something that was common to all of these different groups that he found, whether he was talking about the Inuit or the Masai Mara in Africa, or Fijians and Maori in Polynesia. They all built their diets on nutrient-dense animal foods. So things like liver and organ meat, eggs, dairy products, fish and shellfish, blood, and all these different kinds of things that are that are products that you can only get from animals. And so, I mean, fundamentally, I think that what we need to do is governments basically need to reverse the entire nutritional advice that has been given over the last 100 years. You know, we've been told, for example, because of the lipid heart hypothesis, that cholesterol causes heart disease. Well, it doesn't cause heart disease. So what's happened over the last 100 years is that we've had a radical move away from traditional animal foods, butter, fatty cuts of meat in general, and animal products, dairy, towards an industrially produced diet, vegetable oils and seed oils, products like those. And it's been a disaster for our health. I mean, we are sicker than we've ever been. We were promised that this transition would make us healthier, make us happier, and in actual fact, it's made us fatter and sicker and more dependent on the government and on the products of pharmaceutical corporations than we've ever been in our lives. And so I think the fundamental thing that governments need to do, if they want healthy citizens, is to encourage them to eat like their ancestors. That's what we need to do. And that means reversing, as I say, basically all of the nutritional advice that has been given over the last 100 years.
Nosotros hicimos un seminario la semana pasada, eso fue el 13 de julio. Empezamos a las 9 de la mañana, un seminario que hemos estado invitando en este canal hace mucho tiempo, donde tuvimos pues 6 meses de investigación. Hablando de cómo será el próximo conflicto global, y empezamos a las 9 de la mañana. Por cierto, ese día se fue la luz varias veces por razones aquí técnicas después del huracán, y como eso de las 10:30 ya yo estaba explicando, pero era parte del seminario, cómo, quién y por qué iban a intentar matar a Trump, porque qué significa él realmente, ¿no? Hablábamos de mercantilismo y todo lo que significaba. Y bueno, terminó pasando horas después, ¿no? Como a las 4 de la tarde fue eso, ya luego. No quiero decir con esto que nosotros lo sabíamos, ¿no? Sino con 6 meses de investigación, pues tienes acceso a muchos documentos que te ayudan a predecir algunas cosas. Igual mencionábamos allí, pues, de que está por desatarse, pues, una nueva era de ciberataques, porque todo esto es parte de una guerra híbrida prolongada, ¿no? Y de largo alcance, que eso fue lo que explicamos entre otras cosas en el seminario. Bueno, fíjense. Menos de 7 días después se desata este ciberataque que ha dejado pues incomunicado a muchos sistemas, problemas para todo el tema de vuelos aéreos, bancos, etcétera, etcétera. Y esto es solo el inicio. Bueno, todo eso está en ese seminario, sobre todo la explicación de qué es lo que tienen preparados para nosotros y por qué y cómo podemos nosotros intentar irnos preparando para tener un colchón de aterrizaje, sobre todo, ¿no? Eso lo pusimos con Carlos Pisolito, creo que no tiene desperdicio. Quería hacer esa pausa para decirles, pues amigos, yo entiendo que hemos vivido mucho tiempo periodos de paz, pero bueno, estamos en una circunstancia distinta y yo creo que lo mejor es ganar tiempo, tratar de entender lo que va a pasar, tratar de entender lo que está pasando y en la medida de lo posible irse preparando. Ahí explicábamos muchísimos elementos de cómo puedes hacerlo y sobre todo explicar, ¿no?, cómo será ese conflicto, que no se va a parecer en nada a lo que nos ha venido vendiendo Hollywood todas estas décadas, ¿no? Entonces, los dejo con eso y continuamos con José Alberto Villasana.
I totally agree. And sorry to interrupt you. I
No.
just want to say I'm totally agree.
Yes. So what we need to do then is we need to make sure that government should be encouraging farmers to produce the kind of foods that we should be eating, rather than producing the kind of foods that corporations want to sell us. So, in the US, the Midwest, what do corporations want to sell us? They want to sell us genetically modified corn and genetically modified soy. And so that's all that grows across the Midwest is GM corn and GM soy. And it's a disaster for our health. It's a disaster for our health. Those are two of the principal constituents of all this dreadful processed food that people eat. And it's got like that because of corporate control of the food supply, because corporations are allowed to dictate the priorities of the food supply. What we need instead is we need health to dictate the to dictate the priorities of the food supply. So, the government should be encouraging small farmers. It should be supporting small farmers with subsidies and with grants and other forms of help. And it should be encouraging them to create local systems of food supply, so that actually people eat locally produced organic or semi-organic food, nutrient-dense animal foods, in the manner of their ancestors. That would be an amazing program for health. If the US, I mean, I don't think the US government is going to do that, but if I were in control of the US government and I wanted to improve the health of the nation, that's exactly what I would do. I would break the corporate stranglehold on agriculture, and I would let health and local priorities dictate the kind of foods that are produced in the different regions of the US. And I think that would have an enormous benefit on the health of individuals and the health of the nation.
Yeah. You know that I was remembering when you talk about this experiment of this scientific traveling the world looking for the faces
Weston Price.
Yeah, and I remember 10 years ago, a very good friend of ours, of our families, she's a dentist, and she used to say, you don't know the hard that it is to take a teeth out of a guy or a woman that lives in the little towns, in the beaches, or in the middle of the fields, and if you compare that to people of the city, it's so easy. Now, I mean, the people of the city, you just took it and that's out. But the people of these little fish towns or middle of the field, what we call the cow towns, it's so difficult because they're really attached there. It's rooted, And I was remember that it's incredible. You describe very well in your book the context of the crisis of masculinity.
Yeah.
How can modern men rebuild their physical and mental strength in the face of these challenges imposed by the current global policies? What role do diet and exercise plays in this process? And I really want to know that, because now I always been like a sort of an athlete, and I always been in a gym. I remember 20 years 20 years old, 25, 35. Now I'm 42, and now I see when I go to the gym, I don't know, it's a bunch of guys that they're clearly with a lack of masculinity there, and it's all over the place now. And I'm really interested in this answer. What role do diet and exercise plays in this process of gaining a strength and regain masculinity?
Yeah, well, I think it's absolutely central to improve your diet and to exercise, to get active. Sedentary lifestyles and poor diet are massive factors in the decline of masculinity, and in particular in the decline of testosterone, because testosterone is the master male hormone. I mean, women need testosterone too, and men need estrogen too, but men should have much more testosterone than estrogen, and women should have much more estrogen than testosterone. But testosterone levels have declined enormously in the last 50 years, something like 1% a year. So testosterone levels have basically halved in the last 50 years, and that's a disaster for masculinity, because it really does mean that men on average are less masculine than they were. There's no way around it, and people who've been alive that long notice, and even people who haven't been alive that long notice. And so it is fundamentally a product. It's a complicated problem. I absolutely a complicated problem, and it's not simply reducible to diet and exercise. So one of the things that I talk about a lot is the toxic chemicals that we're exposed to on a daily basis in basically everywhere we go. We can't avoid exposure to toxic chemicals, to herbicides and pesticides and chemicals that are involved in the manufacture of plastics, in particular, and chemicals in personal care products, in toothpaste and deodorants and makeup and fragrances. fire retardants and all sorts of things like that. And a lot of these chemicals are endocrine disruptors, and that means that they disrupt the body's natural balance of hormones. A lot of them basically mimic the female hormone estrogen, so they actually behave like estrogen in the human body. And if you're a man, that's a bad thing because it reduces your testosterone levels and makes you, basically less masculine. And so one of the things that I advocate, of course, is that you need to reduce your exposure to these chemicals, reduce your dependence on plastics, filter your water, eat good quality food, avoid processed food. But I do think that the fundamental things, the really fundamental way that you transform your life is if you're inactive and you eat a bad diet, you improve your diet, you ditch the processed foods, you start eating nutrient-dense animal foods, you start preparing food yourself, because that's the best way to ensure that the food you're eating is of a high quality. And then you get active. You get active. And those things, doing those two things will transform your life. I can guarantee you. If you're overweight, if you can lose weight and eat better, within a year, 6 months, a year, you will be unrecognizable to yourself if you can stick to a determined regimen of exercise and eating properly. Because what it will do is it will normalize your hormone levels. It will increase your testosterone as a man.
Your energy levels.
Yeah, your energy levels. It will improve your metabolism. You'll have more energy. You'll have more confidence as well. That's the thing. I mean, a lot of people, I think, a lot of men feel totally out of control. They feel like they're not in control of their lives, that they don't really, that there's nothing that they can do really to change their lives. But actually, if you start small and you make these little incremental changes that build up over months and months and months, then actually what you're doing is taking control of your life, and you're actually demonstrating to yourself that you can change your life, that you are in control of your destiny. And that's a very, very powerful thing for a lot of men who actually have never felt that before. So, I mean, I can't emphasize enough how important I think it is today to take control of your diet and take control of your activity levels and exercise, walk, run, lift weights, something like that. Just get active, and you absolutely can transform your life. And the thing is that the bar is so low today. The bar has never been lower for men. It's like if you look around at the average man is overweight, unmotivated, weak. It's so easy not to be that now. You just have to start, and you can actually distinguish yourself tremendously from your peers, in a way that perhaps, before it wasn't quite like that, because actually, people weren't able to be fat and lazy, and people weren't, life was harder and people had to be hard to survive. But now it's perfectly within our means just to spend a life, living on the sofa, watching television, playing computer games, eating junk food, watching pornography. You can do smoking marijuana. You can do that. You can live a life like that, an entire life like that, and no one will say anything about it. And you'll just fade from existence, and that will be the end of your life. But actually, if you want something more, and I think most men do want more. This is the thing. I think that if you ask to the average man who lives like that, are you all you could be? Are you really happy with your life? If you could get them to give an honest answer, I think most of them would say, actually, no, I'm not. I know I'm useless. I know I could be better. I know I could be stronger. I know I could be fitter. I know I could be a better son, a better husband, a better father, but it's getting people to take that first step. I think that's the difficult thing. And a lot of people think, oh, I don't have time. I don't have the energy. I don't have the money. I don't have this. I don't have that. But actually, if you're humble and you just start small and work from there, then anybody, I think, can do it. But it's, I think it's vital today.
I have one more question before we leave, and it's the concept of raw egg nationalism and the promotion of a diet rich in animal foods are central to your philosophy. How do you respond to criticisms that these approaches are unrealistic or are even dangerous to health? What do you say to those people?
Well, I would say there's no evidence that these diets are harmful. In fact, it's quite the opposite. And I mean, my work, I mentioned Weston A. Price. My work is grounded in particular in the work of people like Weston A. Price, who I think has demonstrated beyond all shadow of a doubt that actually, human beings should be eating nutrient-dense animal foods. They're essential to good health. They're essential to flourishing, to physical and mental health. The fact that foods like eggs and butter and steak and red meat, etc., have been demonized over the last 100 years is absolutely no argument really for anything. I mean, because actually you only need to look at the effect. Human beings haven't got healthier. We might be living longer, but that's not the same thing. And that's in large part to do with access to healthcare and medication, etc. If you actually look at most 80-odd-year-olds or 90-year-olds, they're not healthy. I mean, who wants to be a 90-year-old in a nursing home, right? Who wants to spend 10 or 15 years of their at the end of their life in a nursing home, sitting in a chair? I mean, the fundamental truth, I think, is that actually we haven't provided better health. We've just made people live longer. So it's easy to get obsessed about the numbers, about life expectancy, etc. But actually, if we look at the kind of lives that people are living, especially in the West and also outside the West, because in Asia, Latin America, etc., Africa, even they're starting to adopt very seriously Western lifestyles now, and they're encountering all of the same problems that we've encountered. And I mean, fundamentally, I think it just makes sense to eat like your ancestors. I think human beings have evolved over a period. Modern human beings have evolved over a period of, let's say, 200,000 years, and for the vast majority of those 200,000 years, human beings have eaten in the way that Weston Price described. Nutrient-dense animal foods supplemented by carbohydrates, yes, by fruit and vegetables in a seasonal manner, when they were available. But the majority of food that our ancestors ate would have been nutrient-dense animal foods, and eating that way caused us to be the organisms that we are. It's actually an evolutionary argument about the kind of creatures that we are, and we are the kind of creatures we are because of what we ate, and what we ate was nutrient-dense animal foods. So, I mean, I think that fundamentally I have history on my side, basically. That's what I would say. I would say, look at the history. This is human history. This is what we ate. Why would we want to change that? And look, we actually have changed, and it's made us very, very unwell. So maybe we need a rethink.
Yeah, and I always try to do this mentally, this exercise mentally, about our fierce ancestors. I mean, I'm pretty sure they passed time walking, looking for food. Once they have the food, they eat the meat, and then walk again, and walk again, and walk and eat food. And in that process, we build what we are. And now they don't want us to eat meat, but to eat insect. It's incredible. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being with us. It's been a pleasure and an honor. I hope we can meet again in the future. Guys, remember that you will have in the description the links of his latest book, the Substack link, and the Twitter. It's very important because this REN organization, Raw Egg Nationalists, is a big, it's something that we need to read and share, because it's a big part of our community, the people that would try to resist this elite and survive. So it's very important for us. Thank you so much.
It was a real pleasure, and I'd love to speak to you again. Thank you.
We will do that. Well, guys, thank you so much for being with us, and remember to share the content, to like, and to activate the little bell, please. Thank you so much.